"You smell like war. Get out of my diner." Those 7 words hit the morning air inside Willow Creek Cafe at 7:42 on a Tuesday, loud enough that every one of the 31 customers heard them. The old man in the faded green field jacket didn't argue. He set his unopened menu back on the counter, nodded once at the waitress who'd refused him, and walked into the October cold without a word. 31 people watched him go. Not one of them stood up. His name was Harold Vance. He was 78. And 3 minutes from that moment, 12 men in tan berets were going to walk into that diner and change every life inside it. If you believe a man's dignity isn't measured by the smell of his coat, type honour in the comments and stay with me. Because what's coming, you're not going to forget. Harold Vance lived alone in a 1-story clapboard house at the end of Ponderosa Lane, half a mile past where the pavement gave up and turned to gravel. He had built half of that house with his own hands in 1976, back when his wife Ruth was still alive and still teasing him about the crooked window above the kitchen sink. The window was still crooked. Ruth had been gone 3 years that October. He still set 2 mugs out at 5 in the morning, still poured coffee in both, still drank from one and let the other go cold on the windowsill where she used to sit, while she watched the mule deer come down out of the timber to drink at the creek. That Tuesday would have been her 76th birthday. Every year on Ruth's birthday, for 41 years, Harold had taken her to breakfast at the Willow Creek Cafe. Eggs over medium, sourdough, bacon crisp but not burnt, black coffee. Ruth always got the short stack with a single slice of ham and 2 glasses of orange juice because she said one was never enough. After she died, Harold kept going. He ordered both breakfasts, ate his own, looked at hers, left cash on the table and a folded napkin under her plate. The old waitress, Edna, knew him. She never brought a check. She'd worked there since the Johnson administration, and she knew what that second plate was for. But Edna had retired in August. Harold pulled on the jacket a little after 7. It was an M65 field jacket, olive drab, worn thin at the elbows, the right cuff darker than the left where his hand had rested on the stock of a weapon for weeks at a time 56 years ago. The patches were gone, the shield-shaped one from his shoulder, the smaller ones above the pocket, but the stitching holes were still there if you knew where to look. He had cut the patches off a long time ago. He kept them in a cigar box on top of his dresser, and he had not opened that box in 9 years. His right hand had a tremor in it, not from age. It came from a piece of metal the size of a dime that a field surgeon in Pleiku had not been able to fish out of his shoulder in July of 70, and it had been travelling slow through his nerves ever since. His hip clicked when he walked. He did not limp so much as favour the left side. He moved like a man who had learned a long time ago that pain was only information, and you kept going. He stepped out onto his porch at 7:30. The October air had teeth. He patted the pocket over his heart, the way he always did before he drove anywhere, the way Ruth used to tease him for, checking for something that was not a wallet and was not keys. Then he climbed into the truck and drove into town. What Harold did not know, as he turned onto Main Street and saw the diner's red neon open sign flickering through the mist, was that 340 miles south of where his boots hit the gravel, in a hotel parking lot in Billings, 12 men were already drinking coffee and checking the time, and his name was written on the first line of every single one of their itineraries. Willow Creek Cafe sat on the corner of Main and 2nd, a squat brick box with a buzzing neon sign and a yellowed menu taped to the window. It had been there since 1954. The inside was all red vinyl booths and brown formica tables with silver edges, the kind of place where the coffee was never better than adequate and the eggs were never worse than fine, and the people who ate there did not come for the food. They came because they had been coming for 40 years, because their fathers had come, because it was where, in a town of 1,900 people, you went to remember you were part of something. That morning the diner was full. The early shift at the lumber mill had come in at 6 and was just clearing out. The school bus drivers were on their second cup. A table of 4 old men in feed caps, the same 4 who had occupied the corner booth every weekday since 1991, were arguing about the price of diesel. Behind the counter, a cook named Ramon was working 3 skillets. The place smelled like bacon and maple syrup and the faint rubber tang of the vinyl seats when they warmed up in the sun. The new waitress was a woman named Marla Briggs. She was 34 years old. She had moved to Willow Creek in June, after her mother died, and left her the small trailer at the edge of town that was now the only thing Marla owned outright. She had taken the diner job because there was not another job to take in a place that size, and she had been promoted to shift manager in September, because the previous manager had retired and nobody else wanted the clipboard. Marla had things in her life that nobody in that diner knew about. A son in juvenile detention in Missoula. An ex-husband she was afraid of. 3 pills a day she could not really afford. She had not slept more than 4 hours any night that week. None of that was an excuse, but it was the reason. She saw Harold through the window before he got to the door. She saw the jacket first. Her father had worn a jacket like that. The man who had taught her to be afraid of men who wore jackets like that. The man whose funeral she had not attended and did not intend to. Her jaw tightened before her brain caught up. The bell over the door rang. Harold stepped inside. He took off his cap. He stood at the little sign that said, "Please wait to be seated," and he waited. He did not look around. He did not try to catch anyone's eye. He stood the way he had stood in 1,000 chow lines at 1,000 forward bases, patient and quiet, the cap in his left hand, his right hand steady against his hip. Marla walked over with the coffee pot still in her hand. She did not smile. She did not say good morning. Behind the counter, Ramon the cook looked up from the eggs he was tending and felt his stomach tighten in a way he did not understand. He had worked in that kitchen for 12 years. He had seen 10,000 customers walk through that door. He had never, in all those years, felt the room change the way it was changing right now. He would remember this moment for the rest of his life, as the last quiet moment before everything went wrong. "We're full," Marla said. Harold looked past her shoulder at the 6 empty booths along the front window, and the 3 open stools at the counter, and the 2 tables by the pie case that had not been cleared yet but were unoccupied. He did not say anything. He just looked at her. "I said we're full," Marla repeated, louder this time. 2 of the old men in feed caps turned their heads. One of the bus drivers put down his fork. "Take the counter," Harold said quietly. His voice was sandpaper low, the voice of a man who used his words carefully, because he had once had to whisper in situations where the wrong volume meant the wrong ending. Marla's lips thinned. "I don't think so. It's open. It's dirty. I don't mind." "I do." Harold set his cap down on the little host stand. He did not raise his voice. "Mum, today is my wife's birthday. She's been gone 3 years. I've eaten breakfast in this diner on her birthday for 41 years. I'll take whatever seat you've got." Marla's jaw did something then. A muscle jumped. And for 1 second, she would spend years trying to understand it later, during long nights when she could not sleep. She looked at the field jacket, at the thin elbows and the darker right cuff and the holes where the patches had been, and something in her broke sideways. She did not see the jacket. She saw her father's jacket. She saw herself at 8 years old and her father coming home drunk and cold-eyed, and the smell of him, and the way her mother had stopped looking at doors. "You smell," she said. Harold did not move. "You smell," she said again, louder so that the diner heard it. "You smell like whatever you've been doing out in the woods, and you smell like that jacket, and you smell like—" She stopped, but the word was already in the air, formed in her throat, and it came out anyway. "War. You smell like war. I can't seat you. Get out of my diner." The diner went quiet. Harold looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the clock on the wall, 7:42. He looked at Ramon, who had both hands flat on the counter now and was staring at his own knuckles. He looked at the 4 old men in feed caps, none of whom would meet his eyes. He did not get angry. He did not argue. He did not explain that the jacket smelled like cedar and pipe tobacco and the inside of a closet, because he did not wash it often, because he did not need to, because it had not been outside in 21 days. He did not say anything about his wife, or the 41 years, or what he had been doing in October of 1970 that had put the smell she was imagining into a jacket that looked just like his. He just picked up his cap, he put it on, and he walked out. The bell over the door rang on his way out. It was a small, cheerful sound, the kind of sound a bell is supposed to make when someone leaves a place that fed them well. For a full 10 seconds, nobody in Willow Creek Cafe said anything. Then the noise came back, not all at once, in pieces. A fork clinked, a chair creaked. Somebody cleared his throat. The 4 old men in feed caps stared down at their coffee. The table of school bus drivers looked at each other and then looked away. A woman in booth 3, mid-60s, grey hair in a long braid, retired librarian named Joyce Halverson, had her mouth open with a piece of toast halfway to it, and for a long moment she just held it there. Joyce was the first person to put her fork down. She pushed back from the booth. She stood up. She reached for her purse. She walked over to the host stand where Harold's receipt for a meal he had not ordered should have been, and where the little bell was still vibrating faintly from the door. "Marla," she said quietly. Marla was wiping down the menu Harold had touched. She did not look up. "Marla, honey, you just threw out Harold Vance." "I threw out a man who smelled," Marla said. "You threw out Harold Vance." "I don't know who that is." Joyce put her purse down on the host stand. "No," she said, "you don't. And that's the problem with this town right now, isn't it? Nobody under 40 knows who that is." Behind her, the 4 old men in feed caps had finally started looking up. One of them, a rancher named Dale McAllister, slowly, painfully, pushed himself to a standing position using the edge of the table. He was 81 years old. He had known Harold for 60 of those years. He did not say anything. He just walked out. 2 minutes later, a school bus driver named Ed Pearson laid a $10 bill on his unfinished breakfast and walked out too. Then the other 3 bus drivers. Then a young couple near the window. By 7:48, 6 customers had left the diner without another word, leaving half-eaten plates and full coffee cups and correct change. And Marla was standing behind the counter, watching them go with a towel in her hand and the colour gone from her face. But she still had not figured it out. She still thought, because she was 34 and exhausted and afraid, that these people were leaving because she had made a scene. She did not yet understand that they were leaving because of who she had made the scene about. Ramon the cook was watching the clock on the wall. 7:49, 7:50. The eggs in his pan were starting to burn and he was not doing anything about it. He was a man who believed quietly in signs, and the sign right now was coming in hot. At 7:51, the front door of Willow Creek Cafe opened again. But it was not Harold. Harold was sitting in his truck in the parking lot. He had not turned the key. He was holding the steering wheel with both hands. His right hand was tremoring more than usual, and he was watching it like it belonged to someone else. He was thinking about Ruth. He was thinking about the morning of October 28th, 1972, when he had come home from the war 6 months late. Late because of the hospital in Japan, and then the hospital in San Francisco, and then the hospital in Denver. And Ruth had met him at the bus station in a blue coat she had bought new for the occasion, and she had not flinched at the scars on his face, and she had not asked him what had happened, and she had driven him home and sat with him on the porch in silence for 4 hours before either of them said a word. She had said, "I'll wait, as long as you need." He had said, "It might be a long time." She had said, "I know." He was thinking about the last morning of her life, the hospital, the window, the light on her face. How she had asked him, near the end, to promise her that he would not stop going out, that he would still go to the cafe on her birthday, that he would still talk to people, even when he did not want to, that he would let himself be seen. He had promised. She had smiled. He was thinking about the smell of the jacket. It did not smell like war. It had, once. 56 years ago it had smelled like rotting jungle and diesel and gunpowder, and the specific copper-sweet smell of what happens when a young man from Nebraska named Kowalski takes a round through the femoral artery and bleeds out in your arms over the course of 7 minutes while you try to keep his head off the ground. But Ruth had washed the jacket. Ruth had washed it 6 times over the first year he was home. The smell of war had come out a long time ago. What was left in the fibres now was cedar from his closet, and coffee from his kitchen, and the faint trace of the rosewater Ruth had sprayed on it every spring because she said it needed to know it was loved. It did not smell like war. It smelled like Ruth. Harold put his forehead down against the steering wheel. He did not cry. He had not cried at Ruth's funeral. He had not cried in 40 years. He did not cry now. But he sat there for a long minute with his forehead pressed against the cold wheel, and his eyes closed, and his right hand shaking against the gear shift, and he thought, "I promised you I'd still go out. I'm sorry, Ruth. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I tried." He was just about to turn the key when his phone rang. It was a number he had not heard in 11 years, but he knew it before he looked. Some numbers you do not need to see. Some numbers you just feel. He answered it on the second ring. "Sergeant," said the voice on the other end, and Harold Vance sat up straight in his truck, 78 years old with a tremor in his hand and tears he refused to let fall, and for the first time in 53 years he said a word he had not said in half a century. "Here, Duke." Duke Callahan was sitting on the hood of a black Suburban in a hotel parking lot in Billings, Montana, and he had been staring at his phone for 6 minutes, trying to work up the nerve to dial. He was 63 years old. He had retired 4 years ago as Command Sergeant Major of the 75th Ranger Regiment, after 42 years in the Army, after 3 rotations in Iraq and 5 in Afghanistan, after a chest full of decorations and a back that would never sit comfortably in a chair again. He had commanded thousands of men. He had walked into the Oval Office twice. He had been afraid of exactly 4 things in his life, and calling Harold Vance was one of them. He had not spoken to Harold in 11 years, not since Ruth's funeral. Harold had not wanted company after that. Harold had made that clear the way Harold made everything clear, by saying nothing, by not returning calls, by quietly and firmly closing a door. But this week was the 55th reunion of what had been Company C, 75th Infantry, Ranger Vietnam, and Duke was the senior surviving NCO from that company, and it was Duke's job to call. It was also Duke's penance. Because in July of 1970, Duke had been a 19-year-old private first class on his 3rd week in country, and a 6-man long-range reconnaissance patrol had walked into an ambush in the Ashau Valley, and Harold Vance, Staff Sergeant Harold Vance, aged 22, 3 years in the Army, 1 Silver Star already pinned and a Bronze Star with V device, had carried Duke 1,100 metres out of that kill zone with a sucking chest wound in Duke's right lung and 2 rounds in Harold's own shoulder and thigh. Duke had been unconscious for most of it. He had woken up in a field hospital in Da Nang 4 days later with a chaplain holding his hand and a note on the pillow beside him that said, in the blocky, precise handwriting of a man who'd been taught penmanship by a Nebraska schoolteacher, "You're okay now. H. Vance." Duke still had the note. It was in a frame in his study in Fort Benning. He had looked at it every single morning for 55 years. And now, in a hotel parking lot in Billings with a convoy of 11 other old Rangers getting into their trucks behind him, Duke dialed the number and waited. When Harold said, "Here, Duke," in that old sandpaper voice, Duke had to close his eyes. "Sergeant," Duke said, "where are you right now?" "Willow Creek," Harold said. "I'm sitting in a parking lot." "Which parking lot?" "The cafe." Duke looked at his watch. He looked at the GPS on his dashboard. He looked at the map of Montana that was open on the passenger seat. He had been planning to drive out in the afternoon. "Sergeant," Duke said, "is anything wrong?" There was a long silence. "No, Duke," Harold said finally. "I'm fine, just running late this morning." Duke knew him. Duke had known him for 55 years. Duke could hear in the quiet at the end of the line exactly the thing Harold was not saying. "Stay right there," Duke said. "Stay in that truck, we're 10 minutes away." And then he got off the hood of the Suburban, walked over to the other 11 men who had served under Harold Vance in the bloodiest year of their lives, and he said one sentence. "We're going in early." In 63 years, Duke Callahan had never disobeyed a movement order. He had never shown up early to a formation he was expected to arrive at on time. But he looked at his watch, and he looked at the phone in his hand, and he understood, without needing to be told, without needing a single other detail, that somewhere in a parking lot 340 miles away, his old sergeant was not fine, and the woman who had made him not fine was, at that exact moment, pouring coffee for people who were never coming back. She did not know it yet, but her shift was about to end. They left Billings at 7:56, 12 men in 4 vehicles, 3 black Suburbans and 1 Ford F-250 with a dented rear fender that belonged to a retired first sergeant named Cy Washburn, who had driven 800 miles from New Mexico to get there. They did not talk much on the road. They were old men now. The youngest was 63. The oldest was 81. They had stringy arms where there had once been rope-thick muscle, and they had white hair under their tan berets, and some of them wore glasses they had not needed in the jungle. They had knees that clicked and hips that ground, and hearts that had been patched and repatched by army surgeons. But they had all, without exception, put on the beret that morning. They had all, without exception, put on the old jungle camo blouse with the subdued arrowhead patch still sewn to the left shoulder. They had all, without exception, laced their boots the way they had been taught by a man named Harold Vance in the back of a deuce and a half in 1969. Duke drove the lead Suburban. In the seat next to him was a man named Louis Ortega, retired Sergeant First Class, Company C medic, the man who had packed Duke's lung wound in the Ashau Valley while Harold carried them both. In the back seat were 2 other Rangers, both retired Master Sergeants, both with silver stars, both with hands that had held dying men. Lewis was looking at his phone. 340 miles. "We can do it in 4 hours," Duke said. "We can do it in 3. Duke pressed the accelerator. The Suburban pulled away from the speed limit like a horse that had been waiting for the bell. They made it in 3 hours and 11 minutes. At 10:53 on that cold October Tuesday, 4 vehicles with Montana and New Mexico and Georgia and Texas plates pulled into the parking lot of the Willow Creek Cafe in a town of 1,900 people, and 12 men in tan berets got out and stood in the cold. They did not hurry, they did not shout. They formed up without being told in a loose diamond formation, and they waited while Duke walked over to the battered pickup truck where an old man was still sitting behind the wheel. Harold looked up. His eyes were wet and he had not let himself know it yet. Duke opened the driver's side door. "Sergeant," he said. "Duke," Harold said. "Are you ready to go in?" Harold looked at the diner. He looked at the door he had walked out of 3 hours ago. He looked at the red neon open sign that was still flickering in the window. "I'm ready," he said. Duke offered him his arm. Harold did not take it. He was 78 years old, and he had carried a 19-year-old kid named Duke Callahan 1,100 meters through a burning valley once upon a time, and he could still get out of a truck on his own. He stepped down. He straightened his jacket. He settled his cap. He turned toward the diner. And the 12 men behind him, without a word being spoken, fell in. The bell over the door at Willow Creek Cafe rang at 11:02 in the morning. It rang for the first man. It rang for the second. It rang 12 times. Once for every man who walked into that diner in a tan beret with an arrowhead patch on his shoulder and a face that had seen things no one in that building could have imagined. It rang a 13th time when Harold Vance, 78 years old, in his faded M65 field jacket and his scuffed work boots, walked in last, behind all of them, the way a sergeant walks behind his men when he's bringing them home. Inside the diner, everything stopped. Marla was at the register. She had a receipt tape in one hand and a bundle of ones in the other, and she was counting. She looked up. Her mouth opened. She did not drop anything. She did not say anything. She just stood there with the register drawer half open and watched 12 strangers file into her diner in formation and stop, in unison, just inside the door. Duke Callahan stepped forward. He was a big man, even at 63, 6'3", 220 pounds, grey hair cropped short under the beret, a scar running from the corner of his right eye down into the collar of his camo blouse, the scar from a fragment in Kandahar in 2011, the kind of scar that had been stitched by someone who did not have time to be gentle. His eyes were pale blue and perfectly calm. "Ma'am," he said, in a voice that filled the room without being raised. "I'm looking for the manager." Marla's throat worked. That's me. "Ma'am, my name is Ray Callahan, retired Command Sergeant Major, United States Army. This morning, at 7:42, you refused service to a man who is standing behind me right now. His name is Harold Vance. Before we go any further, I need you to confirm for me that you remember what you said to him." Marla stared. The receipt tape fell out of her hand. I don't—" "Ma'am," Duke said, still calm, still quiet, "I'd like you to say it again, out loud, in front of these 11 men behind me, in front of the rest of your customers. I would like you to repeat, word for word, what you said to Sergeant Vance 3 hours ago." The diner was utterly silent. Ramon the cook had turned off all 3 skillets. The 4 old men in feed caps, who had come back into the diner at 8:15 to sit in silent protest, unwilling to eat but unwilling to leave, had turned all the way around in their booth. Joyce Halverson was standing by the window. The bell over the door was not moving anymore. Marla's eyes went from Duke's face to the man behind him. She saw Harold, really saw him, for the first time. The cap in his hand, the thin elbows of the jacket, the steady dignity in the way he stood. Something in her face started to come apart. "I said," she started. "Louder, Ma'am," Duke said. "I need the room to hear." "I said he smelled," Marla whispered. "I said he smelled like—" "Like what, Ma'am?" "Like war." Behind Duke, the 11 other Rangers did not move. Not one of them. But something in the air between them changed. Something hard and very old. Luis Ortega, the medic, closed his eyes for a long second and then opened them again. Cy Washburn, the first sergeant from New Mexico, put his hand flat over the arrowhead patch on his shoulder. Duke Callahan took one slow, measured step forward. "Ma'am," he said, I think you need to sit down, because what I'm about to tell you about the man standing behind me, who you called filthy, who you threw out of your diner, who did not argue with you because he has not argued with anyone in 55 years. What I am about to tell you about that man is going to change your life, and you are going to spend the rest of it trying to forgive yourself for what you did this morning." Duke did not wait for her to sit. He turned slightly, so that he was addressing the diner as much as Marla. He spoke without raising his voice. He did not need to. The silence in that room was doing the amplifying for him. 1970, Duke said. July. Valley in the central highlands of Vietnam called the Ashau. You all may have heard of it. You may not have. It was the sort of place that chewed up American boys and spat out body bags and paperwork. A 6-man long-range reconnaissance patrol from Company C, 75th Infantry Ranger, was inserted into that valley on the morning of July 23, 1970, with a simple job: count North Vietnamese regulars, call in coordinates, stay hidden. Duke paused. He reached into the inner pocket of his blouse. He took out a folded piece of paper that had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases were paper thin. He did not open it. He just held it. On the second day, that patrol was made. An NVA element of approximately 240 soldiers walked into their position at 14:30 local. 6 Americans. 240 enemy. The patrol leader, Staff Sergeant Harold Vance, 22 years old, 3 years in the Army, had exactly long enough to call in contact before his radio operator took a round through the throat. Radio operator died in his arms. Patrol's senior scout, Specialist 4th Class Kowalski from Nebraska, took a round through the femoral, bled out in 7 minutes. The patrol's medic took shrapnel in both legs and could not walk. The patrol's heavy gunner took a round in the abdomen, and the patrol's youngest member, a private first class on his 3rd week in country, name of Callahan, age 19, took a round through the right lung. Duke's voice did not waver, but his hand, holding the paper, was shaking. Staff Sergeant Vance was the only uninjured member of that patrol. His orders were to signal for extraction and hold position. Extraction was 40 minutes out. The NVA element was 30 meters away and closing. Any reasonable soldier, any reasonable man, would have held position, covered his team, and waited to die beside them. Duke looked at Harold. Harold was looking at the floor. Staff Sergeant Vance did not do that. Luis Ortega, the old medic, stepped up beside Duke. He was a small man, 75 years old, with white hair and hands that trembled. He spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet and slightly accented. "He put me on his back first," Luis said. "I could not walk. He tied my wrist to his belt so I would not fall off if he had to run. Then he picked up Callahan with his other arm, because Callahan's lung was collapsing, and he said, I remember this, he said, 'Hold my jacket, kid, just hold my jacket.' And then he started walking, 1,100 meters, through active contact, with 2 men on him and 2 rounds already in his own body. The diner did not breathe. He stopped 3 times, Luis said, each time to kill the men who were trying to kill us. Each time he picked us up again and kept walking." Duke unfolded the paper now. He held it up so that the diner could see it. It was a photocopy. The edges were soft with handling. The text was close-printed government type. "This is the Silver Star citation," Duke said, "for Staff Sergeant Harold Vance, dated October 14th, 1970, but it's the 2nd Silver Star. I'd like, if you'll permit me, to read from it." Nobody said anything. Marla was sitting now. Someone had put a chair under her, she did not remember who. Duke read, "For gallantry in action against an armed enemy of the United States in the Republic of Vietnam on the 23rd and 24th of July, 1970. Staff Sergeant Vance, serving as patrol leader of a 6-man long-range reconnaissance patrol from Company C 75th Infantry Ranger, was engaged by an enemy force of estimated battalion strength. Despite sustaining 2 gunshot wounds and the loss of 2 members of his patrol, Sergeant Vance refused to yield his position until all remaining wounded were recovered and accounted for. Exposing himself repeatedly to direct enemy fire, Sergeant Vance carried 2 critically wounded soldiers over 1,100 meters of contested terrain to a secondary extraction point, engaging and neutralizing enemy combatants along the route. Upon reaching the extraction point, Sergeant Vance refused medical evacuation until all wounded personnel were loaded. His extraordinary heroism, unwavering devotion to his men, and unshakable composure under fire reflect great credit upon himself, Company C, and the United States Army. Duke folded the paper. He put it back in his pocket. He got the Distinguished Service Cross for that valley too, Duke said. The Silver Star was for the first hour of the ambush. The DSC was for the second 1100 metres. He looked at Harold. Harold was still looking at the floor, but his jaw was working. "Ma'am," Duke said softly, turning back to Marla, "the jacket you smelled this morning, that M65 field jacket he was wearing, is the same jacket he wore out of that valley. It has been washed, it has been patched, it has been folded and unfolded 10,000 times. It does not smell like war. Ma'am, it smells like the inside of a Nebraska farm boy's closet. But if it did smell like war, if it smelled like the thing you thought it smelled like, then I want to tell you something very important." Duke took off his beret. He held it against his chest. "War smells," he said, "like the man who carried me out of it. War smells like the man who saved Luis Ortega's life, and Cy Washburn's life, and mine. War smells like the only reason I have 3 grown children and 7 grandchildren. War smells like Harold Vance. And Mom, if you ever get lucky enough in your life to smell that smell again, you get down on your knees and you thank God for it. Because it means a man walked out of hell and came back to feed you breakfast." The diner sat in total silence. Marla was crying now, quietly, without moving. The kind of crying that happens when a person's whole understanding of the last 3 hours rearranges itself in real time. But Duke Callahan was not finished. He had come 340 miles to say something specific, and he had not said it yet. And in about 90 seconds, he was going to turn this diner from a place of shame into a place that would be talked about in this town for the next 50 years. Duke turned slowly and faced Harold. "Sergeant Vance," he said. Harold looked up. His face was set, but his eyes were wet. "Sergeant Vance, we did not tell you we were coming today. That was on purpose. We did not tell you because if we had told you, you would have refused. You would have said you did not deserve it. You would have said it was too much fuss. You would have hung up the phone, and we would have driven 800 miles for nothing." Duke reached into his blouse pocket again. He took out something small and black. A small velvet box worn at the corners. "Sergeant Vance, the Department of the Army, at the recommendation of the Secretary of Defense, has reviewed the action reports from the Ashau Valley, July 23rd through 24th, 1970, and in light of new testimony and new documentation submitted over the last 4 years, has elected to upgrade your 2nd Silver Star and your Distinguished Service Cross to a single Medal of Honor." The diner was perfectly silent. Harold Vance did not move. "The formal ceremony will be at the White House in March," Duke said quietly. "The President will present it to you. We did not want you to hear it for the first time in a press release. We wanted, all of us wanted, you to hear it from us, from your men, in person." Harold looked at the velvet box. He did not reach for it. "Duke," he said. His voice was barely audible. "Duke, no." "Sergeant," Duke said. "No, Duke, no. I just did my job." "Sergeant." "Those boys, they were my boys. I was supposed to bring them home. I didn't bring Kowalski home. I didn't bring Tillman home. I didn't—" "Sergeant," Duke said. And now his voice cracked for the first time. "You brought me home. You brought Louis home. You brought 11 of the men standing behind me home. Some of us got to have children. Some of us got to have grandchildren. Some of us got to grow old. And we have been waiting. For 55 years, Sergeant. We have been waiting for our country to say out loud what we have been saying to each other in quiet rooms for half a century. And they are finally going to say it. And we are not going to let you refuse it this time." Harold's hand was shaking very hard now. And then, without any warning, without any signal, without any word from anyone, in a diner in a town of 1,900 people, at 11:17 on a Tuesday morning, 11 old men in tan berets, all veterans of Company C, 75th Infantry, Ranger, rose up from a loose diamond formation into a straight line, 4 to Duke's left and 7 to his right, and they came to attention. Their boots struck the tile floor in unison, and then 12 right hands, Duke's included, rose in salute. To Harold, to a sergeant who had carried them out of a valley 55 years ago, and then carried them quietly in his heart every day since. Marla Briggs stood up from her chair. She did not know why. She did not know how. She did not think. Her hand went up to her forehead in the worst, most uncertain civilian salute ever given by a human being. Her eyes were streaming. Her mouth was open in a silent sob. Harold Vance looked at her, and he saluted back. For a long time after the salute dropped, Nobody in the diner moved. The 4 old men in feed caps had stood up too. They were not military men. One was a rancher, one was a retired plumber, one had worked the same lumber mill for 42 years, one had never left Willow Creek. But they had all stood in the booth, with their coffee cups in hand, and their jaws tight and their eyes red. Joyce Halverson was crying openly. Ramon the cook had come out from behind the counter. He was not crying. He was just standing there with his apron on, and both hands flat at his sides, the way a man stands when he does not know where else to put himself. Duke closed the velvet box. He did not give it to Harold. Not yet. Harold was not ready to hold it. Duke understood. "Sergeant," he said gently, "have you eaten yet?" Harold shook his head. Duke turned to the diner. "Ma'am," he said to Marla, "I understand you serve breakfast here." Marla's legs almost gave out. She caught herself on the back of a chair. Yes, sir. My men and I have driven a long way. We would like, if it's all right with you, ma'am, we would like to eat breakfast in your establishment. 12 of us, and the sergeant makes 13, and he's going to order first." "Of course," Marla whispered. Of course, sir. Please sit anywhere. Please." She could not speak. She stumbled backward toward the kitchen and she put her hand over her mouth and she just stood there. The rancher, Dale McAllister, came up out of his booth slowly on his 81-year-old knees. He crossed the diner. He did not say anything to Harold. He just put his hand on Harold's shoulder, the right shoulder, the one with the shrapnel which Dale did not know about but which Harold felt through the jacket anyway, the way old wounds recognize a gentle hand, and he squeezed once. Then he kept walking. He went to the counter. He pulled out a stool. "Ramon," he said, "I'd like to buy breakfast for these 13 gentlemen, whatever they want. Put it on my tab." "Sir," Ramon said, "the diner doesn't take tabs." "It does today." Ramon started to say something. Then he looked at Harold and at the men behind Harold, and he nodded and said, "Yes, sir. Sure thing, Dale." Duke turned back to Harold. "Sergeant, what would you like?" Harold's voice was very small. "Eggs over medium, sourdough, bacon crisp but not burnt, black coffee." "And the second plate?" Duke asked quietly because Duke knew. Duke had come to the funeral. Harold's jaw worked. "Short stack," he said. "Single slice of ham, 2 glasses of orange juice." "One was never enough," Duke said. "No," Harold said, "it wasn't." Marla Briggs, in the kitchen doorway, heard that exchange. She did not know what it meant. She did not know about Ruth. She did not know that every year on the 22nd of October, a 78-year-old man who had carried 2 wounded rangers 1,100 meters through hell had come into her diner to order breakfast for the woman who had waited for him to come back. She was about to find out, and when she found out, the last piece of her was going to break, and it was the breaking of that last piece that was going to save her life. They ate breakfast together, all 13 of them. The rangers pushed 3 tables together in the middle of the diner, and Harold sat at the head, and the 2 plates came out, his own and Ruth's, and Duke poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot Marla had brought, with shaking hands to the head of the table. "Who is the second plate for, Sergeant?" one of the younger rangers asked. He was 64. He had not been in that valley, but he had served under Harold later, at Fort Bragg in 73. Harold did not answer for a long moment. "My wife," he said finally, "Ruth. It would have been her 76th birthday today." "And the orange juice?" the ranger asked. "She said 1 glass was never enough." The table fell quiet again. Luis Ortega reached for his own coffee. He did not drink it. He just held it. "To Ruth," Duke said, raising his cup. "To Ruth," the others said. They drank. In the kitchen, Marla Briggs was crying so hard she could not see the eggs on the range. Ramon had taken the spatula from her and was cooking them himself. She had slid down the wall and was sitting on the tile floor with her knees pulled up and her face in her hands, and she was crying the way a person cries when they realize, all at once and without warning, that the story they have been telling themselves about who they are is not true. At 11:41 she came out of the kitchen. She had washed her face. She walked across the diner. She stopped at Harold's chair. "Sir," she said. Her voice was wrecked. "Sir, there's nothing I can say. There's no words. I don't deserve—" "Sit down," Harold said quietly. "Sir?" "Sit down, ma'am. Take a minute." Marla sat. She was trembling. Harold did not look at her for a long time. He looked at Ruth's plate. He looked at the window. He looked at the jacket folded on the chair beside him. Then he looked at Marla, and his eyes were the kindest eyes she had ever seen in her life. "I had a daughter once," Harold said. "Briefly. She was 2 years old. She's been gone a long time, but if she had lived, she would be about your age. And if someone had spoken to her the way you spoke to me this morning, I would want that person to hear what I am about to say to you." Marla's mouth trembled. "You're not a bad person," Harold said. "You're a tired person. Tired people say things that bad people only think. There's a difference. You can come back from tired. You can't come back from bad. And I can see in your face, Mum, that you came back 3 hours ago when you heard what you sounded like from outside yourself." Marla could not speak. "Go home," Harold said. "Not today. When your shift ends, go home. Call someone you love. Tell them you love them. And tomorrow morning you come in here and you pour coffee for the first person who walks through that door, and you look them in the eye when you do it. That's all." Marla nodded. She was crying too hard to speak. Harold turned back to his breakfast. Duke beside him put a hand on his arm. Harold put his hand over Duke's. "Eat, Sergeant," Harold said. "Your eggs are getting cold." That was in October of last year. In March, the President of the United States presented Harold Vance with the Medal of Honor in the East Room of the White House. Harold wore the M65 field jacket to the reception afterward, over the suit. Ruth's cigar box of unit patches rode on the plane with him in a velvet pouch Duke had sewn himself. 11 of the 12 Rangers from Willow Creek were there. Luis Ortega stood at his left shoulder. Cy Washburn stood at his right. When the President placed the ribbon around Harold's neck, Luis, who had once had his lungs packed with a T-shirt in an active firefight, was heard by everyone in the front row to say, very softly, in Spanish, "Mi hermano." Marla Briggs is still at the Willow Creek Cafe. She was not fired. Harold asked Dale McAllister to speak to the owner personally, and Dale did. Marla is the shift manager on mornings still. She pours coffee for veterans for free. There is a small framed photograph above the register now. Harold Vance and 12 Rangers in tan berets, taken at a table in that diner at 11:49 on a Tuesday morning in October. Marla dusts it every morning. She does not look at it every morning. Some mornings she cannot. Her son was released from juvenile detention in May. She picked him up in a used truck she bought with tips. She told him on the drive home what had happened. He cried. She cried. They are still trying. Joyce Halverson started a program at the Willow Creek VFW. It is called the Ruth Vance Breakfast. Every Saturday morning, any veteran who walks in eats for free. The first Saturday, 11 men came. The 10th Saturday, 31 men came. By the 52nd Saturday, people were driving from 3 counties over. Harold still goes to the diner on Ruth's birthday. Eggs over medium, sourdough, bacon crisp, 2 orange juices. He does not sit alone anymore. Duke flies in from Georgia, so does Luis. So does Cy. The table is always set for 13. It is always full. The jacket still hangs on the hook by his door. It still smells like cedar and coffee and the faint trace of rosewater. It does not smell like war. It never did. It smells like a man who walked out of hell and came home and lived quietly for 55 years and waited, without asking, without demanding, without complaint, for the country he bled for to remember his name. If this story moved you, if you believe every old man in a worn-out coat deserves a second look before a first word, hit that subscribe button, share this video with one veteran in your life, and type honour in the comments for Harold Vance, for Ruth, and for every ranger who still stands when the bell rings. Because some men don't smell like war. They smell like the reason we're still free.